morning, everyone. Welcome back to World Class Inventors. I want to draw your attention to the thumbnail I put up with this video. You'll see a picture of two oil filter boxes. Well, I invented both of those products, the Fram TRT and the Fram Double Guard. And I'm going to be sharing with you some personal anecdotes on how that came about in a very brief thumbnail sketch. But before I launch into that, I do want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So just hang on for a minute. So this is video number 10 in the series, and it's part 3 on vetting. In the last video, I gave you 7 jumping off points in which you can begin to start to investigate or to vet your idea. Vetting your idea is very, very important. Absolutely, it's crucial because it begins the inventing process. During the vetting process and the researching process, you are going to figure out whether you actually have an idea worth pursuing or not. Enough said on that. The other thing that I mentioned was when you're talking to people, and of course you're doing so cautiously, have a nice attitude. Be inquisitive, be friendly, be disarming, engage people. And the most critical thing is have people like you. Even if it's done over the telephone, people can like or dislike you instantly. If they like you, they're more apt to talk to you, they're more apt to want to help you, and you can take it from there. So let's get back to the thumbnail. I want to describe both products, and I want to give you a very brief overview on how I came about vetting them and inventing them. So the first product is the TRT oil filter, and that is an additive treated oil filter where the additive has been pumped into the filter matrix of that filter and it liberates itself once the hot engine oil comes in contact with it. And that major constituent, that additive, is a alkaline-based additive package. It's called alkyl zinc dithiophosphate. And what happens is this, simply put, in an engine. Engines are acid-making machines. They have moisture and condensation. They have heat, they have sulfur involved in the fuels, and when this all combines, the engine tends to want to make acids. And of course, the particulates from combustion, etc. So you have an acid-making machines. So every oil that you buy has an alkaline-based additive package to combat the formation of acids. And this is important because the acids actually break down the lubricity or the lubricating properties of motor oil in conjunction with the contaminants that get formed. And it's not good for the internal parts, the metal parts, the clearances, but most importantly, it begins to degrade the oil and it won't lubricate and it won't cool your engine, as the engine and the oil were designed basically in tandem. So I came across the constituents of this oil filter back when I was a young lad and a truck driver. I had driven tractor trailers across the United States, and I owned a couple of them during that period of time. And I would change my oil, I would maintain my rig. My rig had over 1 million miles on it. And back during that stage, that period of time in the early 80s, oil was just starting to become what it is today, meaning it was just starting to become synthetic. There were no synthetics out there. The only one of note was Mobil 1, and the world was against Mobil 1 because they didn't believe that there could be such a thing as synthetic motor oil. And maybe one day I'll tell you the story and how I came to this conclusion. So, as an owner-operator, driving across the country and driving the mid-east section of this country especially, I would log a couple thousand miles a week. Now, that doesn't sound like much to truck drivers of today, but that was a huge deal. Our speed limits weren't 70, 75 miles an hour like they are today. They were 55. And there were Smokey the Bears in the medians and in the woods and in the dales. We had CB radios, we had radar detectors, and boy did we talk during those periods of time. It was a big deal to run your truck over 55 miles an hour because you'd get a ticket, and a big one. So I operated under CBs, paper maps, pay telephones that hung on the walls. There was no such thing as GPS. There was no such thing as beautiful stereos in trucks. And of course, there was no cell phones or internet to speak of whatsoever. This was old school. This was when we were allowed to run 10 hours a day with a maximum of 500 miles a day traveled. Paper logbooks. Oftentimes you ran 2 logbooks. We're more or less outlaws, but that's how trucking was then, and it doesn't even resemble that today. So when I came across changing my oil, which at that time cost me a couple few $100s back then, and I had to do it every 8,000 miles or once a month for sure. I would send off a bit to the oil analysis laboratory in South Jersey, and that laboratory was Anna Laboratories, and the owner of it was Sadiq Ali. And I got to meet Sadiq Ali over the telephone, and eventually I would go down to his laboratory a few times. We'd talk, he'd give me the tour, I'd take him out to lunch. And he was kind of a tutor, a mentor to me about oil and oil analysis, because I was rather hell-bent on extending the drain interval of the oil change. So I really wanted to push it from 8,000 miles to, let's say, 16,000 miles, and still keep the oil intact, still take the particulates out, neutralize the additives, and refresh the additive package without changing the oil altogether. And I had pretty much been in the position where I was ready to file my patent, so I could talk to him in confidence. And I got a good feeling for him, so I knew he wasn't going to abscond with filing a patent. Because back then, there was no such thing as provisional patents. They were non-provisional patents. It was a big rigmarole. And people weren't so apt to steal your idea in that sense because it was first to invent. It wasn't first to file. So Sadiq gave me a lot of insights. He confirmed what I was working on, and he recommended a friend of his, and I met this gentleman at a local diner. He was pretty high up in the engineering and chemistry department of Chevron Oil. We had a wonderful relationship, and I could call him. And again, these men were older than I was. I was just a kid, and they became mentors to me. And he introduced me to some parts of Chevron Motor Oil Company, or Chevron Oil Company, I should say. And he provided me samples of the alkyl zinc dithiophosphate, put me in touch with some experts at Chevron Oil on additive packages. I got samples of it. You could buy it commercially from them and put it in your own brand of motor oil. This is just an additive package that they made. You could put it into the regular lube stock. So anyway, I had a couple of older guys helping me. I was the young buck with the idea, and they were pretty excited, and they wanted to see me succeed. So eventually I would file my 901 patent. And that is the one for the additive treated oil filter. And that is the basis, that is the thrust behind the Fram TRT extended life oil filter. I brought Fram the manufacturing blueprint, the sales blueprint, the marketing blueprint, gave them the size and the scope of the market. I knew the competitors. I knew what they were doing. They did too, but I had to tell them what I knew. You see, when you're licensing your product, and I'm jumping way ahead of myself, and you're talking to people that you want to license your product to, you have to talk to them on their level. They have to be bowled over by your knowledge, your scope, your interest, the lay of the land. They have to know that you're not a BSer, because you're going to be breaking into their industry. Of course, depending on what you're inventing, you might not have to be so crazy about it. But I was breaking into an oligopoly, a monopoly. There had not been any significant change in oil filtration for 40 years before I broke into the industry. So I had to kind of come on the stage as somebody who really knew what he was talking about, and somebody who could back up everything he said. There was no puffery. There was no BS. Everything was vetted. In their minds, it was vetted. They knew that I knew. So that's what vetting is all about. I'm going to get into the double guard and how that came about in the next video, because this one's already at 10 minutes and I don't want to go to 20. But that's just the background of how the TRT came into existence. I do want to close out and say this, and I'm sure I'll say it in the next video. When I called on Fram, they were the most prominent oil filter manufacturer in the world. They had 28% of the market. Purelator was nipping at their heels. They were only 1 percentage point behind. Two different companies, two different paradigms for sales and marketing. I'll explain that to you in the next video. The point is, they had 30 plus automotive filter engineers. Not one of them had a single patent. And when I called on Fram, I had two, and they were benchmark patents, and they were changing the complexion of the way that oil filters would be made and manufactured, not only throughout the United States, but the world. And all in all, that was still a very hard sale for me. So I'll see you in the next video. We'll talk about the other half of the thumbnail, the double guard, and we'll go on from there. But I wanted to give you a personal anecdote on vetting, the importance thereof, because as you're vetting, you're inventing, you're developing, and you're moving forward in order to develop trade secrets, in order to develop a trademark, in order to develop the patent. You can protect yourself with one or all three of these mechanisms, and we'll get into that much deeper as we travel on down the road. So I'll see you later. Thanks a lot for your time, and God bless you. Bye-bye.